My partner left me, had another man's child, and returned begging for a second chance. Am I wrong for shutting the door on her? You've heard the phrase, "I never saw it coming," repeatedly. For me, it was exactly that way. I was with my partner for the entire 5 years we were together. To be honest, I thought we were doing well for the most part. I believed we were on the same page and had plans for our future. The issue was that, at least in my opinion, we both wanted children. As soon as we got married, we began discussing it seriously. She would often talk about wanting 2 or 3 kids, what we would name them, how we would decorate the nursery, and other details. She would even plan our life with our future children while browsing baby gear and clothing online. It kept us connected and was sort of our thing to talk about. Everything seemed perfect, and we were eager to start this new chapter together. However, we received some devastating news that left me speechless. After a few months of trying to conceive, we visited a doctor to find out what was wrong. To cut a long story short, it was me. The doctor essentially informed us that our chances of naturally becoming parents were very limited because my count was far too low. It felt like a punch to the gut. All those plans we had suddenly vanished, and I felt worthless. I was really hit hard by the news and ended up in a pretty dark place for a while. I was a complete mess at first, but therapy ultimately helped. Initially, she seemed supportive, stating that she would be happy with just the two of us and that it didn't matter. However, there was something strange about how she said it. Right from the start, she seemed to drop the idea of children far too soon. One minute she was talking about having a family, and the next, she claimed she didn't need kids to be happy. Don't get me wrong. I understand that people have second thoughts, but her entire demeanor felt off. She had stopped thinking about baby names and was now completely avoiding any conversation about children. Furthermore, it seemed as though she began to view me differently. She would suddenly start making little jabs at me that she had never made before, like how I wasn't taking care of myself or that maybe I should work out or do more around the house. Sure, I may have gained a few pounds, but it felt like she was constantly looking for reasons to criticize me. When I questioned her about the sudden shift in attitude, she would dismiss it, claiming I was being overly sensitive and imagining things, but I knew something was wrong. It was different from the woman I married, the one who would spend hours discussing our future. She wasn't particularly cruel, but there was a certain coldness about her, as if she had already mentally checked out and was just going through the motions. As time went on, I began to trust her when she assured me that everything was okay. To avoid coming off as needy or insecure, I stopped pressing. After a few years, we were just getting by. We had fallen into a rut where we hardly discussed anything important. We seemed more like roommates than partners. She would always dismiss my attempts to discuss other options, like adoption or surrogacy, by saying she didn't want to consider them. "I am happy as long as we're together," she would say. But I never really understood. She seemed more focused on convincing herself than on me. Then she suddenly announced that she wanted to go on a girls' trip. She had gone on a few outings with her friends before, and I had always encouraged her to do so it wasn't strange for her to want to go now. She had been talking for a while about wanting to travel to the U.S. with her friends, and we lived in Manchester. We had built this trust over the years, so I didn't think twice about it. I made sure she had everything she needed, helped her pack, and drove her to the airport. I remember her last words before she left. "Thank you for being so supportive," she said, turning to face me. She sounded so sincere that I dismissed it as her simply expressing gratitude, even though I found it a little strange that she would say that. It's not like I had done anything particularly noteworthy. I stayed up that night to make sure everything went well by calling her when she landed. I kept myself busy around the house, watching television, keeping an eye on the time, and waiting for her to text me to let me know she had arrived since her flight was expected to take a few hours. I called her to check in as soon as I saw her flight had landed. The phone kept ringing, but nobody picked up. I didn't think much of it because I assumed she was exhausted and might have gone straight to her hotel and crashed. However, by morning, I still hadn't heard from her. I began to feel a nagging worry in the back of my mind. I thought perhaps she was just busy or her phone was on silent, so I tried calling again and then texted her a few times. However, after a couple more hours of silence, I was officially freaking out. In the end, I called her sister to check if she had heard from her. Nothing. I was really starting to panic at this point. I even went so far as to call her friends who were supposed to be on the trip, hoping that maybe her phone had malfunctioned or she just hadn't had time to check in. However, since they weren't traveling with her, they were just as confused when I contacted them. Back at home, they were enjoying coffee while sitting 2 streets away. It dawned on me then that she wasn't traveling with friends, wasn't on a girls' trip, and hadn't gone anywhere with anyone. She had simply vanished. It felt like my stomach had dropped as I sat there with the phone. I couldn't comprehend it. Why would she tell me such a lie? Why wouldn't she notify me before leaving? I tried to convince myself that it was some sort of mistake, like maybe she had missed a connecting flight or couldn't contact me due to an emergency, but deep down, I knew she had planned this. Her saying thank you for your support and the entire girls' trip scenario were all parts of whatever she had concocted. I was at a loss for what to do. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. I didn't marry this woman. I didn't even recognize this person. The coldness, the way she had stopped discussing our future, and those little digs about my appearance and health all began to make sense. I simply hadn't noticed her. Perhaps I hadn't wanted to see that she had been drifting away for a while. I just sat there looking at my phone that night, hoping for a call, a text, or anything else. However, nothing materialized, and I knew in my heart that it wouldn't. I remember lying there and staring at the ceiling when I woke up the following morning, thinking it was all just a bad dream. But when I saw that her side of the bed was empty, reality set in. She had gone. She gathered her belongings and disappeared. The reassurances I had given myself the previous evening that perhaps she was late or her phone had died were no longer valid. She had clearly planned this and wanted to leave. I was completely in denial for the first few days. I would keep calling her phone, hoping to hear her voice and maybe get an explanation. I even left messages hoping she would understand, even though I was half the time at a loss for words. However, I only received silence, which strangely made things worse. I felt like I had been a stranger to her the entire time and had been left to figure it out on my own without any clue as to what went wrong. Her family was initially just as surprised as I was. They hadn't heard from her, and her mother didn't know anything about her plans. In the end, I visited them more times than I could count to speak with her mother and get answers. They must have felt sorry for me when I couldn't bring myself to eat. Her mom would prepare meals for me and occasionally let me stay there. She would sit there while I talked about all the little things that didn't make sense, trying to figure out how my life had suddenly become so complicated. To be honest, there were times when I was too numb to speak and just sat there in silence. I oscillated between rage, despair, and remorse. I would constantly ask myself what went wrong. Was there a sign I missed? Was I not paying enough attention to her? On certain days, I would review all of our arguments and conversations in an attempt to determine what caused her to leave. I kept thinking about what I could have done better and how I could have saved our relationship. I realized this seems dramatic, but I was completely fixated on finding the solution, as if it would somehow make everything better. I hardly slept or ate, and my work began to suffer. People would notice and inquire about my well-being, to which I would just respond that I was busy with personal matters. Admitting that my partner had abandoned me without a word was embarrassing. I eventually told a few close friends, and they tried their best to distract me by taking me out and encouraging me to move on. However, I would still worry about her, even when I was with them, wondering where she was and why I wasn't enough to keep her. The incessant inquiries from strangers, neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, and even former co-workers who had heard I was married were among the worst aspects. "How's married life treating you? And how's your partner?" were the questions they would pose. It was always like pulling off a new scab. I would just smile and tell them everything was good because I lacked the courage to tell them she had left. But every time I uttered that lie, it felt heavier. The only thing that worked in the end was therapy. Although I had never gone before, I realized I couldn't manage it alone. After a few months of hardly functioning, I found a therapist and began attending once a week. It was beneficial to speak with a neutral person who was unfamiliar with me or any of our baggage. I would express my rage, betrayal, and the void she had left in my life. I would talk endlessly about the restless nights and how I would lie awake, repeatedly reliving everything. The therapist helped me realize that she chose to leave, and it was her decision, not mine, and that there was no magical moment that would have kept her here. It was a difficult pill to swallow. I thought for a long time that I was flawed in some way, which was why she had left me, but gradually I began to see things differently. I chose to overlook her long-standing coldness and distance, assuming that things would improve on their own. I convinced myself that I could hold it together, and that our relationship could be saved by my own efforts alone. The realization that it wasn't meant to be hurt. As time passed, I began to rebuild my life in small increments. It wasn't until she left that I realized how much I had lost in our relationship. I had always been the one trying my hardest to ensure she was happy, and that our home life was comfortable. However, I had a lot of free time now and was unsure how to spend it. I began resuming old hobbies that I had forgotten about. I tried cooking new meals, went to the gym, and started reading books I had been putting off. Eventually, my work also improved as I began to feel more like myself. I started to put more effort into my job, but at first, I was just going through the motions and barely keeping up with my workload. I felt like I still had control over something in my life, which was one of the few things that gave me a sense of accomplishment. Although I had always been skilled at what I did, I now gave it my all. The extra hours and focus paid off. I got a promotion as a result of it, something I never would have obtained if I had been moping about my problems. Even so, there were painful days. A picture, an old movie ticket stub, or other small items that brought back memories I tried to ignore would occasionally remind me of her. Looking at them, I would question her actions, whether she ever considered me, and whether she ever felt bad about what she had done. But gradually, those moments began to fade. I was able to let go of those memories a little more quickly and move on a little more easily each time. Additionally, I reconnected with people I hadn't seen much of since getting married. We resumed our activities, including hiking and going to the driving range, something I hadn't done in years. Having someone by my side who wasn't involved in the mess and could support me in moving on without pulling me back into the pain was a relief. In hindsight, I realized that I had invested far too much of myself in that relationship. In being her partner, I felt like I had lost a significant portion of who I was when she left, as if she had taken a piece of me with her. But I was rediscovering who I was, piece by piece. Although it wasn't quick or easy, I was making progress. I was finally able to see myself as someone who wasn't defined by her past actions. When I looked in the mirror at the end of that year, I wasn't just the person whose partner had abandoned them. I had rebuilt, I had survived, and I was stronger now. I felt like I could truly live my life without her shadow looming over me for the first time in years. To be honest, I took pride in that. I believed I had moved on from everything. After all that chaos, life had finally begun to seem normal again, or as close to normal as it could be. My work was going really well, my friends kept me occupied, and I had my routine down pat. Even my daily thoughts about her had stopped. While I still occasionally had flashbacks to odd memories, it wasn't as frequent as it used to be when she was somehow involved in every part of my existence. She was, therefore, the last person I expected to see standing there when someone knocked on my door one Saturday morning. But there she was, with a baby at my doorstep. I went cold. It was like seeing a ghost, and for a moment my brain simply stopped functioning. Though perhaps a bit worn down, she still had her usual appearance. She looked at me as if she genuinely believed I would be delighted to see her. And yes, it really got to me because I had assumed I was no longer interested. As it happens, meeting her again evoked many feelings I had previously suppressed. At first, I just stood there and stared without saying anything. She asked, "Can I come in?" with no embarrassment. After grinning at me as if nothing had happened. The nerve! She just shows up here as if I should be welcoming her back with open arms after everything she's done. However, I maintained my composure and assured her, "No, you can stay there and explain." I didn't want her in my home, bringing all the craziness back into the one area I had created for myself. Despite her somewhat disoriented appearance, she remained in her spot and began telling her story. "I know this might come as a shock, but I wanted to come back and explain everything," she said, even having a hopeful expression on her face as though she really thought I would be willing to listen. I was tempted to just close the door and laugh in her face, but I was too intrigued. I was curious about the reason behind her disappearance and what she had come up with. She continued by explaining that she had regretted leaving and that she had come to the realization that she had lost the greatest thing that had ever happened to her, not my words, but hers. She claimed to have thought a lot and to have finally realized what was important in life after having this child. After years of ignoring me, it seemed that what mattered most was unexpectedly knocking on my door. "This is our second chance," she remarked, glancing down at the infant. What I was hearing about our second chance was unbelievable. It sounded like we would just pick up where we left off, with this child acting as some sort of miraculous reset button. I was furious on the inside, but I attempted to maintain a neutral appearance. She continued by claiming she wanted us to be a family once more and that although she had made a horrible mistake, we could now start over as just the three of us. The one question that had been bothering me ever since she arrived was finally asked, "What made you go?" I tried to speak as steadily as I could, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could contain myself now that she was here. I needed to hear it from her since I had tortured myself with all the possibilities for years in an attempt to comprehend. After hesitating and glancing down at her feet as if embarrassed, she finally told me the truth, or at least what I thought it was. She acknowledged that she left because she wanted a child and had found someone who could provide one for her because I couldn't. She honestly stated it as if it were insignificant, as though she hadn't destroyed my life and as though I should just nod and accept it as gospel. She clarified that although the man she had left didn't stay, she had already given birth and knew she wanted me back by that point. As simple as that. Easy. I paused to think about what she was saying. Here she was confessing that she had left me, fled with a man, had his child, and was now expecting me to accept it as if I would simply forgive and move on. You went and met someone else, had his baby, and now you think you can return and act as if nothing happened? I asked her. She broke down in tears and apologized for her terrible error. However, I was completely unmoved by that. She kept talking about how she knew we were meant to be together and that I was the person she really loved. To be honest, maintaining a straight face was difficult. She sounded so naive that I was shocked. Her expression was one of desperation, not love, and I could see it. She then attempted to guilt-trip me by talking endlessly about how difficult it had been for her to be a single mother. In fact, she attempted to paint herself as the victim in all of this, acting as though her decisions hadn't brought her to this point. She assured me she was prepared to work things out this time and that she wanted my help. I couldn't stop wondering, who does she think I am? I listened to it all as I stood there, but I had had enough. I told her bluntly, you have to live with the decision you made a long time ago. Here there is no second chance. She appeared astonished, as if she had never even imagined that I would say no, as if she truly believed she could simply saunter back into my life because it would suit her. She became irate. Just when I thought she would finally understand and depart, she became angry with me, accusing me of selfishness and demanding that I give her another chance to make amends. She said that she could have taken half of everything and divorced me at that time if she had so desired. She even had the audacity to remark that the house should still belong to her. I felt a sense of relief as I realized that I was now seeing her for who she truly was, as if her true colors were being revealed in front of me. I didn't raise my voice or argue with her. We're done, I simply remarked, glancing at her. You finally have the life you've always desired. I no longer have responsibility for this. I cut off any last statements she might have had by closing the door in her face. I was struck with a peculiar sense of serenity as I stood there and heard her muffled screaming coming from the other side of the door. She might shout, knock, or weep. However, I knew I would never allow her to return to my life. The woman I had married and loved was no longer with me. This stranger, who believed she could pick up the pieces whenever it was convenient for her, had taken her place. Feeling lighter than I had in years, I moved away from the door and took a seat. I believed that was it. After I shut the door behind her, I assumed she would understand and simply walk away. Instead, though, she began pounding on the door and shouting various things. The nerve seemed unbelievable to me. She had the gall to stand there and insist that I listen to her while I was in the one place that was truly mine, the only place I had been able to recover from the disaster she had left me in. I initially considered ignoring it and letting her scream until she became weary, but then I started to wonder. I was curious to know what kinds of excuses she would offer this time. To let her know that I was paying attention, I slightly opened the door, but not enough to let her in. She appeared to be astonished that I hadn't given her the response she desired, as if she had just been slapped across the face. As if we were having a typical argument and not coping with her abandonment, she began a lengthy monologue in which she expressed her willingness to forgive me for closing the door on her and her desire to start over. She went on and on about how if we both worked hard, we could work things out. I was unable to contain my laughter at that moment. I actually laughed because this woman had more nerve than I had ever seen. When I did that, she appeared enraged, as if I should feel guilty for not paying attention to her. You left, I informed her. You tossed everything away while you had the chance. I won't just act as though nothing occurred just because you want to. She began repeating things like, you don't understand how hard it was for me. As her cheeks flushed, she continued by talking about how she had been so lost after leaving and how she had discovered her error too late. However, I didn't believe it. I informed her that she had made the decision to leave. She had plotted it, made up a falsehood about it, and then carried it out. Now her remorse meant nothing. She lost her temper at that point. Her entire tone shifted. She stopped the melancholy, repentant act and began to attack me, accusing me of unfairness and lacking the grace to give her another chance. In fact, she dared to declare, "I could have taken everything from you back then if I wanted to. I could have stolen half of your possessions." I simply stood in awe. This woman who had abandoned me without saying anything now believed she should be compensated in some way for not attempting to defraud me, as if she should be commended for not being as awful as she could have been. I said to her, "What the heck should I feel thankful for? That you simply left me without taking anything with you?" She looked at me with a mixture of fury and another emotion on her face, possibly desperation or remorse, but to be honest, I didn't give a damn by then. I had just finished. That was where all the years I had spent questioning myself, feeling bad, and wondering if I was somehow to blame for her leaving vanished. I felt as though the burden I had been bearing was finally lifted when I saw her for who she truly was, but she wasn't finished. She began to pace my porch while complaining that I would regret not giving her another chance and that I would never find someone like her. In fact, by refusing to take her back, she attempted to make me feel as though I was the one who was missing out. It was strange, as if I should be pleading with her to stay. Here she was, the one who ruined everything we had. She became louder and continued to complain about how I had forced her to leave in the first place. When she realized I wasn't going to back down, she said that none of this would have occurred if I had been more understanding about the entire child situation. Her reasoning seemed to indicate that I had failed her as a partner because I couldn't conceive, which somehow excused her from leaving to have a child with someone else. The mental acrobatics were astounding. To be honest, I was shocked that she was attempting to blame me for her decisions. I bluntly told her, "Look, you could have told me the truth if you really wanted a child. When you were making plans to go, you didn't need to lie to me and act like nothing was wrong." She merely gazed at me as if I had smacked her, with nothing to say in response. However, I prevented her from speaking. I continued by telling her, "You have to live with the decision you made on your own. I have no problem with that." She made one final attempt, returning to her dejected expression and urging me to consider the child and how I was being unjust by ignoring him, as if I were the bad guy. She really used the baby in her arms to guilt-trip me, but I wasn't buying into it. "I don't know that child," I informed her. "I am not involved with him. You are not mine, and neither is he." That was the end of it. I could see her coming to terms with it at last. She was aware that I would never change my mind and that I would never allow her to return to my life. I could see the rage waning and being replaced by something else, either genuine regret or simply exasperation. However, I didn't care. She had attempted to walk all over me and expected me to smile and give her credit, but now she was simply a stranger. For a few more seconds, she stood there as if she was waiting for me to decide to call her back. I didn't say anything else, though. When it finally hit her that I meant every word, I just stood there and watched her expression. I closed the door without giving it another glance. I didn't wait for her to hit me again. This time, in my heart, I knew that I had already made up my mind and that there was no turning back. I don't know, but I left the door with the impression that I had finally prevailed. It was over. Even though she had spent so much time hoping to return and using manipulation to get back into my life, I had freedom. There was not going to be another chance for her or for us. She was now only a memory one that I had at last relegated to the past. I felt like I could breathe again after all those years of suffering and shame, and what do you know, it was pleasant. I felt a peculiar calmness come over me as soon as I shut the door behind her. I no longer felt sad, furious, or even astonished. It was as though all of the remorse, guilt, and incessant wondering that I had felt for her over the years simply disappeared. I was prepared to move on since I had at last found the closure I didn't realize I needed. This time it was truly over. Naturally, though, things didn't go as well as I had intended. Her mother texted me a few days later. She apologized, stating she was embarrassed by her daughter's handling of the situation and that she had attempted to reason with her, but clearly it had failed. Her mother was a decent individual. She had been of great assistance to me since her daughter left, and I could see that she was truly distressed by the situation. Although I had nothing against her, I didn't want to be dragged back into that mess. I simply said thanks for checking in, and that was my only response. I wasn't going to waste time justifying my choice, and I wasn't going to offer her mother any more information. She knew it was over because she understood. I learned tidbits over the course of the following few weeks via social media and mutual connections. She had apparently returned to living with her parents, and things weren't going well. The father of the child the man she had left me for had nothing to do with it. He had bailed out completely. She was left to figure things out on her own because apparently he hadn't committed to the long term. Few individuals were eager to help because she had essentially burned every bridge. Her former friends, who had supported me when she first vanished, didn't feel sorry for her. They weren't eager to get drawn back into her drama because they had all moved on. You can't hold them responsible. Her parents weren't too happy either. They didn't have enough money to sustain her and the child. I was aware of this since her father called me shortly after her mother texted me. Curiosity overcame me and I nearly didn't respond. He mentioned that they were having financial difficulties and implied that perhaps I could be of some assistance. He was courteous but straightforward. He continued talking about the baby and how difficult things were for them, saying, "We know you cared about her once." I listened courteously, but I couldn't help but chuckle a little, not aloud. But you get the idea when he began to explain that his daughter only needed a little help to get back on her feet. I politely informed him that his daughter made her own decisions and that I was neither in a position nor in the right frame of mind to assist. Since he didn't pursue it further, I believe he understood the message. Her friends, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, began contacting me. The next thing I knew, some attempted to use the guilt angle, claiming that she was going through a tough time and that perhaps I could find it in my heart to give her another chance. One even had the audacity to say that the child needed a father figure and that I shouldn't let my resentment stand in the way of helping him. However, I refused to back down. I wouldn't allow anyone to make me feel guilty for making my own decision. At last, I had given that woman all I had after years of feeling inadequate, and she had tossed it all away. Instead of relying on me to save her, she should at least take responsibility for her choices. The calls and messages gradually decreased in volume before ceasing completely. Everyone seemed to realize at last that I was serious, that I had moved on, and that I would not get ensnared again. That's when the true calm arrived. For the first time in years, my life seemed peaceful and normal. I had my friends, my job, and my routines. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms. It wasn't a fancy, glamorous one, but it was mine. The irony is that I began to rediscover joy in the small things, which I hadn't given much thought to when I was married. I would read novels I had been meaning to read for years, cook my own meals, and take walks. It felt good to be free, and I understood that I could live my life as I pleased without anyone's approval. I wasn't always concerned about other people's happiness or approval. For once, I felt as though I had gradually regained my life. I occasionally encountered someone who knew us both, and they would inquire, "Hey, what happened with her?" I would shift the topic and respond succinctly and courteously. I simply didn't want to keep going back to a chapter that was so obviously over. It wasn't that I was concealing anything. I had finally mastered the skill of leaving her in the past. When I last heard from her, things weren't going well. She was still jumping between her parents' house and friends' sofas after her welcome, and she was having trouble keeping a job. Every now and then, people I hardly spoke to would message me to say she was approaching everybody who would listen to seek assistance. A few of them even implied that she hoped I might reconsider and decide to play father to her child after all. However, that was not going to occur. I had invested too much time and effort into regaining my life to ever consider taking that route again simply because things didn't go as planned. I wasn't going to be her safety net or the person who picks up the pieces. Nothing was going to pull me back into that chapter. I was finished. Ultimately, I believe I received the necessary closure. She was now coping with the repercussions of her decision, and for me, it was the first time since the day she departed that I felt completely, truly free. I had had enough of her looming over my life. I was happy that I had moved on not in a grand, theatrical sense, but quietly content. And what do you know? That was sufficient. I sincerely appreciate you staying until the very end. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you truly enjoy our videos. Enjoy your wonderful day, and thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life DS.